Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you'll see a little link down below, and you can click on it. You'll end up in Zoom. And when you get there, you'll see another little link, and you can click on it, and you can join us in Mukana. That's where we, basically you become a producer. You run the show. This show is really just dedicated to answering your questions, and there's a lot of questions today. So jump in there, and the first hour is all about what you're interested in the area of virtual and media production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about YouTube strategies and how to stream to YouTube and how it all works and why to stream to YouTube even. And then tomorrow, we're going to talk education, 9 to 11. Emily Russo is hosting that. And I'll be there as a panelist. It's the only place I've been a panelist. The last year was last week was my first time I had to raise my hand. So it was good. It was good. So, but we don't broadcast that to YouTube. So you need to be here for that. It lets us speak a little more freely than we would on YouTube. Now, if you think that you can answer the questions, we would love to have you. This is an incredible panel, and it's a great way to get to know everybody if you have knowledge that you can add back to the group. So you just need to be here by 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for the mic checks to make sure that you're all ready to go. You can get here as early as 6, and we can't promise anything at the beginning. We're just talking and hanging out and waiting for you to come in and check your system, make sure that it's ready to go. All right, Bill, let's go ahead and jump into the questions.
Absolutely. Our first one comes from a guest from a couple of days ago, Nick Batt in the UK, and he asks, can you suggest workflows for generating YouTube chapter logs while live streaming to save the additional post-stream process?
Jeffrey. I think this is what you're doing.
I got too much going on right now. Sorry.
Okay. So Jeffrey would be the one that would answer it. Basically, you're adding text. What we're doing is Jeffrey is adding that text in real time. And Jeffrey would probably have to explain it to us because I actually don't know how it works. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah. So basically what's happening is that Chris has put in a really cool feature in a Mukana where I can actually pull all the questions coming down, and then really quick editing and trying to get under a 5,000 character limit and get as many questions as possible.
How do you put the time in?
First hour. Times come with it. Once the YouTube starts, that's where everything works. So
before Mukana did that, how did you do it?
Before I did that, it was a fun little thing using a spreadsheet, timer, and actually a program that I found that actually does more time stop marks on the in the spreadsheet. So once I put the question in.
And how does what format do you have to have for it to work in YouTube? Is it just a time code? Does it know what to do with time code?
No. All you put in is you put in a time and then a question, and it can go. You can even do that in the comments. So if there's a question that you wanted to, or a point where you wanted to make, you just go in the comments and you put in the time code 07:32 and the question, and it'll show up. People will click on it and it'll go right to that point.
Right. Interesting. Very good. Yeah, but ours, we've slowly made it a little bit more automated, a little easier to make that work. Next question.
Comes to us from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, here on the panel often. Any initial thoughts on the Elgato Facecam announced yesterday?
I ordered one. That's my thought right now. We'll go ahead and test it. I'm going to put it up against the resolution charts to see how it compares to the Brio and to the stream cam. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I saw the live stream with it. They were demoing it, and considering it was a demo of it, some of the shots didn't look that good. So it'll be interesting to see that against the Brio.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, it doesn't have 4K. It doesn't have a microphone. And it's about the same price as a Dell webcam, which is 4K. So
it's the same price as the Brio, which is 4K.
The Brio, yeah, which is 4K, right?
So I think that's the. I mean, it has to line up from our perspective, or from my perspective, it would have to line up in color and at least perceived quality as the Brio, and that's the part we'll have to see. Go ahead, Rupert.
Is the Sony sensor of particular relevance?
The new sensor, it didn't say. I didn't see a size of the sensor. I think but I'm going to guess that Sony size is 1/2.5 or 1/2, probably 1/2.5 or 2.6. I believe that's what that sensor is. It's a Sony sensor that they're using there. So it's not particularly large. So I think that when they say it's the ultimate, they're selling it pretty hard. They've got lots of good graphics and it looks nice, but I'm not sure that it's competitive with the Brio yet. But I ordered one so that we can take a look at it and see how I'm going to put it up against some charts. We'll do some tests. We'll bring it up here as soon as I get it, sometime next week, I think, and then we'll see what happens. Next question.
Nick Bat is back with another question, this time looking into remote trade show coverage. What would be the minimum kit to allow single camera remote streams from the floor while being directed by remote directors, by a remote director or a panel? Live view, or is there something better than that?
I don't think there's anything better. I think there's things that you might be able to find that are less expensive. But the live view has a bunch of things that you'll want that are useful. One is it has a talkback system in it. So, if you have a live view, now if you're doing a live view straight to YouTube, you won't have that talkback. But if you have the receiving unit that goes with the live view, there's XLR inputs into that receiving unit that will allow us to tie in basically a comm system right back into so that you can have talkback to the to the system, for talent. Which is super useful. And I believe that the new, I haven't had a higher one than the LU500, but I believe that the 800 has even video return, for it. I believe that's part of the LU800. And the LU800, I believe, will also do 4K and high dynamic range, do 10-bit transmission. So the LU800 is a great solution, I think. Specifically, what it will do, like for instance, NAB Las Vegas is not necessarily a great place to do this. And what we found is that except for the Panasonic booth, which is right in the middle of the central hall, there's so much concrete and rebar that you just literally don't get it. There's a black hole in the center of the central hall that you just can't penetrate with a live view. But outside of that, we had a lot of luck. I don't think I found anything that's better, and I've used almost everything. Go ahead, Jonas, and then Bill.
For a minimal kit, you could also use a phone with Larry's broadcaster, a remote mic, because the cool thing with Larry's broadcaster is it also has the same feature that Alex talked about with the talkback and video talkback over SRT.
The hard part you'll have in a convention is that the chances of you getting one cell signal that's going to work through the convention is very low. Go ahead, Bill.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. We've done this from NAB a few years, and the combination of the building itself, how far you are from things in large conferences, and even bonded cellular, I think, is far better than Wi-Fi, because the Wi-Fi just get hit massively in those kind of situations. So I would have 2 or 3 secondary and tertiary backups that you can fall back to if you want to do anything consistent. Yeah, The most effective way we did this was with wireless transmission with points that were in the LVCC that were all wired back. So we were going back to RF to make that work, and that was the best way to do it. But we freely walked with an LU500 years ago, 10 years ago, and it was a very, very, very successful stream from our perspective with Pixel Core. Next question. A. Mitchell's in Washington, D.C. is up with the next one. Yesterday, Mark Horner's Corner Chats on Community brought up that the skills vacuum from the current times creates an opportunity to balance issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What can be done in this industry to help fix these issues this way?
The first thing is bandwidth. Like we have to make sure that everybody has it. Getting people included all over the world is really important, because it's really hard to do all the other things when they can't actually interact. Go ahead, Bill.
I'm going to opine that these disruptions, like we've seen across the production industry, are great opportunities for people who otherwise marginalized out of things can get in. I know in corporate, when the big crash happened back in 15 years ago, I saw a lot of middle people get priced out of their jobs and had to leave corporations, allowing the folks below them in the hierarchy to move up quicker, because corporations downsized, the execs stayed, the functional people who got things done at the bottom stayed, the middle got hollowed out, there was more opportunity. So I think there's going to be opportunity coming for all classes of folks.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Also, for the young folks coming into a new career, I saw an article from the Fiber Broadband Association, and they are partnering with colleges and schools to skill people coming out of this education system in that example for fiber and for the work that needs to be done over the next few years, decades. And they're just wanting to sweep people into the industry.
I mean, a lot of these smaller I come from a small town, there's a lot of opportunity if there's enough bandwidth, if there's labs, towns and municipalities can provide labs to get people trained. You're also going to see, I think what we're seeing is a growing impatience by corporate tech companies to wait for schools to catch up. So you'll see grow with Google. That's Google just saying we're not waiting anymore. So, you'll see that happening with almost every corporation. They're just going to move past the colleges and straight into the high schools or whatever age or whatever background people have. So those opportunities are coming because the corporations aren't going to wait any longer for schools to catch up. The structure of education is not conducive to actual learning for being useful in what we're doing. It's moving too fast now. When our skill set didn't need to move very fast, 20 years ago, school was fine, but it can't keep up anymore. Like the structure of it itself is completely bankrupt to what is needed in the marketplace. And that's what we're seeing as a huge mismatch because the schools aren't able to provide the knowledge fast enough. And the companies will just give up on them, which is what they're doing. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's in next with Karl. You mentioned the Manfrotto 244 Magic Arm as a way to fit a camera behind a monitor. The two Dell P2415Q monitors that I have don't have a proper pedestal. Could I clamp the 244 to the plastic stands they use, or would something else work better?
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I would, having owned probably every Magic Arm there is, the iFootage spider crabs are transformational. I'm getting rid of all the other ones and moving over to these. These are clamping my 6K Pro behind me. Yeah, in terms of a Magic Arm, the way that spider, that iFootage have made these clamps, I mean, these will be secure. So I'd look at, from the clamping point of view, look at the solutions that they have, because it will be it costs a bit more, but it is really rock solid.
Okay, real quick, everybody. John and then Rupert.
I had the same issue. I used an auto pull with the super clamp to hang my camera off of it. But there's two super clamps. There's one with the lever that locks, and there's other one with the twist. So make note. Go ahead, Rupert.
I think Douglas's question is more about whether the pedestal will take the clamping force of the clamp. It's plastic. So in that situation, if those monitors have a VESA mount, you can get like a VESA offset, which will give you a bracket, which will give you a kind of more robust surface to clamp something onto.
Yeah, go ahead, Karl.
So this is what I showed yesterday, and you're right. You wouldn't want to put this clamp on it's a thin, hollow plastic pedestal, essentially, for those monitors. What I suggest is something like this.
Yeah.
So it's got a very small footprint. Put it up. It's 21 inches. It's tall enough to go over nearly any monitor. So this is much better. But this will still sit on the back of your desk. If you have desk wobble, then you want to find a tripod beyond your desk.
I highly recommend getting off your desk. Like don't put it on your desk or on your monitor. You're just going to get constant vibration in what you're doing. Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Clamping resistance is the one place where I go for aluminum rather than carbon fiber. The expensive tripods and things like that do not take clamps as well.
Next question.
Moving on to Dan H.
No. You got to watch the tags.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was answering questions, so I messed up.
Yeah, you can also remember, Bill, that you can also just up there you can sort the tags by, so you just won't even see the wrong ones.
No, I have first hour up. This was I was going to hit the next and cycle, and somebody else hit it before I did.
Okay.
So it did a double cycle. I'm sorry.
Got it. Okay.
Is NDI, the next question says, getting a first mover advantage over Smpte 2021 in the Pro-Am market?
It's out in front, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. Go ahead, Karl.
So 2110 is uncompressed. That's a big deal for a lot of places when they move stuff around. That's the big difference between NDI and 2110.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a place for both of them up there, but I think that eventually 2110 is going to become more and more prevalent. Go ahead, Rupert.
I think the vendors who are providing or developing 2110 equipment probably see people who are adopting NDI as prime customers, because I think there's going to be some problems there and they're going to want something better.
Next question.
James Hutcherson just finished, so we're moving on to JHB of New York, and he's saying, whatever I see BTS of people doing behind the scenes, of people doing events production using Zoom, I see a plethora of computers. What are the functions and workflow of all those computers? Thanks.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So these are typically probably pinning computers. That's where you will have participants in meetings or breakout rooms, and you will pin a single participant to each computer and then bring them in as sources to your production. And that's where people are using one machine per participant typically.
And that's what we're hopefully working around next week with Andy. He's coming in. We'll be doing 4 outputs per computer, which will get us on. We'll just have more outputs. so that'll be kind of where we're going with that. But yeah, that's where most of those computers go. And then of course there's just management computers, there's comm computers, there's playback computers, there's the switcher computers, and so it starts to all add up to lots of computers. Next question.
Rupert McCrae, Dallas, Texas says, Google has created a tool to encourage cloud customers toward choosing data center regions with the lowest carbon impact. Will the cloud come under increasing scrutiny for its power consumption and environmental impact?
Everything is. I mean, this is going to be a thing that everyone's paying attention to, and as the weather gets not necessarily always hotter but weirder, that there'll be more and more pressure to pay more and more attention to that process. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just saying, Apple put that into their marketing as they designed those big data centers. They talked about both power consumption and where it was coming from and how they're paying for it, and water consumption, because that's a useful thing to keep things cool in the server center.
And again, I've said this before, but we're going to continue to see drag against large conventions, partially because conventions are going to be expected to publish their carbon footprint, for the actual action, and that's going to put downward pressure on the number of people that they want to have at it. Next question.
Joshua Feingold in New York says the filmmakers in the new Anthony Bourdain documentary have been criticized for using AI to simulate Anthony's distinctive voice. Do you think it was ethical to do this?
Did it turn out well? That's my question, Karl.
So you'll quickly find that ethics don't really matter when it comes to this. So there is going to be a conversation about it, but legally, there is no boundary.
But in an ethics perspective, though, they're not trying to fake it, right? Did they let you? I mean, it's his voice talking about his stuff. It's not like you're having him you're not putting words into his mouth. It's from his book. It's there to represent him there. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I guess New Yorker's Helen Rossner, I'm reading an article, asked the filmmaker how they got Bourdain's voice, and they said they'd contacted the AI company that supplied 12 hours of Bourdain speaking. Mm-hmm. And so they based it on his actual voice. And
but it was his words too, right? I mean, yeah. It's from his book.
Yeah. It's an approximation of his voice. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. But I mean, what I'm saying is that they didn't put words into his mouth. They put, or did they? I don't know. I haven't seen the documentary yet. Go ahead, Rupert.
You'll also find that many actors are actually having themselves captured so that they can be reproduced later after the fact.
Yeah, there's a huge investment right now in actors this has been happening for about the last 10 years, where actors have been digitizing themselves. They've been doing the same thing that you do for Siri with their voice, where they read all these things out. So they've been doing that at different ages, and they've also been having themselves scanned regularly over time. And a lot of it has to do with being able to, their estate is building that into the plan so that their likeness can be used past their death. But also if you look at like a Gemini man and you want to go backwards, don't you wish you had Will Smith when he was young? They made that up. But if you actually had the scans, it would be a lot easier to go back. So what they're doing is that they've been doing that for now over a decade, there's many things that happen in Hollywood that are quiet. that's one of the kind of quiet things. The auto tuning was another quiet thing. And also taking the age off of folks until we really got aggressive about it. That had been happening for a long time. So there's Lola was something that no one talked about for a long time. Go ahead, Courtney, real quick.
Yeah, Hollywood's been doing this for, years and years to replace, especially if you have an actor who does not have looping in their contract to do the aircraft versions to take out the naughty words.
Right.
They'll have a sound-alike actor come in and replace all the words.
Next question.
Johnny STS in Manila in the Philippines is up next. Will Office Hours 2.0 eventually start to use the NDI features of either Zoom Rooms or ZoomISO, or will we continue pinning and screen scraping?
We're going to be using ZoomISO, but we're going to be using it out of SDI. So that's that will be happening as early. We'll start testing it next week, and then you'll probably start to see us. We're going to kind of go through another experimentation phase in August, where we'll have a couple weeks, a week, and then a couple weeks off, and then another week of it. We're trying to be ready to run the show, the new show, by September 1 or the day after Labor Day. Is the goal is to be able to start running the new show at that point. So we'll see how that goes. Next question.
Tim Mann in Melbourne, Australia says, recording ISOs from Atem Mini Pro ISO. Would you recommend the Samsung T5 versus the T7?
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, T5 is the recommended for. The T7 does have issues.
We've had a lot of us. I have T7s that I back the T5s up to because it's twice as big, but I record to the T5s as well. Next question.
James Hutcherson in Dublin, Ireland says, did anyone watch the NDI SDK keynote yesterday? And if so, what are your thoughts?
Did anyone see it? Oh, go ahead, Jonas.
Let's just hope they didn't use NDI 5 for the remote stuff.
Oof. Oliver.
Yeah, about the same, I think they were using the WebRTC stuff though. So
okay. Ouch. Next question.
Comes from Khalid Al Jumaya, I believe, in Haas Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. What's the video chain of Alex Lindsay starting from the lens and including all extra input devices adding to the Atem Mini?
I don't have them all active. I just tore it apart last night to get ready for something. And but the lens is a Canon L series 24-70. That goes into a Blackmagic 6K. I have a 6K Pro, but I use it in the field. I use just a 6K for this because there's no real difference in the sensor. That is HDMI to a Atem Mini Extreme ISO, and then the Mini Extreme ISO, of course, is just USB-C to the computer. I also have another computer that has the Telestrator software on it that lets me do that. That goes in and is keyed into it. And I typically have two more cameras, a close-up camera and an overhead wide camera that I just took out because I was rewiring something. And then I usually have an iPad that is running Keynote into it. So those are the things that I have there. And tomorrow I'll have it all set back up again. I was in the middle of production, and for some reason while I was waiting for something, decided I would tear it apart, and of course didn't have time to put it back together. Go ahead, Courtney.
Are you using your polarizing filters on this camera?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm using a polarized filter I'm using a linear polarized filter on my camera, and I actually have polarizing filters on my lights. So when I turn it, when I match them, it just gets rid of some of the highlights on my glasses. So that's the entire pipeline. Next question.
Gordon Lake's up next from Los Angeles, California. What type of setup would be able to accommodate freelance journalists uploading hundreds of video clips a day and freelance editors being able to download said clips?
Karl?
Frame.io.
Frame.io. That is the way to do this. I mean, it's just, you have to set up the structure, folder structure, and how people are going to do it and process. One of the things that we're going to experiment with in September and then hopefully deploy during NAB is a set of Teradecks that we'll be using Frame.io so that we can have offsite editors cutting coverage on the floor. And so we're going to try to experiment with folks that are there. And if you're interested in being part of that, then sign up to the little volunteer thing that goes out in the email every day. Go ahead, Rupert.
You may also want to look at what the journalistic, if that's a word, organizations are doing. I know the BBC Research and Development Department have all kinds of background projects going on, so you can check out their website to see what they've got cooking.
A lot of them are, a lot of them have their own internal ways of doing it, but I think that a well-organized process with Frame.io would probably be the easiest one that's scalable and something you can just turnkey. Next question.
Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland says, in the context of luma keying lyrics over live video, can ProPresenter send alpha channel to the second or stage facing output monitor?
ProPresenter is capable of key fill. So it not only, you can luma key it if you want, but you and I don't know what it's, I believe that it'll be able to do whatever set of monitors that you want, but it is, I know that it'll do key fill. I don't know if it'll separate the alpha channel as another output. So I'm not certain with ProPresenter on that area, but it's a pretty powerful program. So I'd be surprised if it didn't. Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas says, what does everyone think about the Elgato Wave mic arm LP as a low profile mic arm? And he has a link there. I like that it doesn't dominate a camera shot, but concerned about enough desk headroom for a console with synthesizers and so forth.
Sorry, this threw me off a little bit there. Go ahead, Ken.
Mine's due to arrive in about a week, so I'll give you an update.
Yeah, the only thing that when I look at it, I'm not sure it'll work as well as what I have, which is a lot more expensive, the Ultima, the OC White Ultimate, is that the articulation around the mic, I use a lot. I have a couple more joints. I have 3 joints rather than 1 there, and I think that might make a difference. But I do think that as a less expensive low profile, I'm going to be very curious how it works for Ken, because I think that it looks like a really great update for that. That could be a really awesome, cost-effective way to do this. Next question.
Comes from Nick Batt, and Nick's back with, is there an advantage to using virtual sets in Vmix for 2-up, 3-up shots and so forth?
There's definitely yeah, go ahead, Jonas.
So the big there are 2 ways to do a multiple shot up in Vmix. The one is just using the plain multi-viewer, and the other one is using virtual sets. If you use John Barker's tool to generate the virtual sets, you can position them how you like. And the cool thing is then you don't need to go into the settings to change the multi-view, but you have like a little toolbar next to the input, and there you can set everything up. And another cool feature that the virtual set adds that the multi-viewer doesn't have, if you can set up zooms. So it zooms to the person, and you could do like a 2-up shot of like 2 people, then like everybody, but then if you need to zoom into one person, you can zoom to that person. That's all possible from like a virtual set standpoint versus multi-viewer.
Next question.
Comes from Rupert McRae here on the panel, and Rupert says, NAB seems to be in part organized by Maritz Global Events. Maritz also has digital event capabilities listed on their website. Might companies like this steer their customers, like NAB, towards digital?
Most of the event companies have added a digital arm, mostly to be responsive to the fact that they didn't have anything to do for a year. So they added those things. I think that for the most part, they're pushing their clients back because they just know they don't really understand digital. they put it on there, but they're like, hey, we can do digital too, so that they didn't get left behind. But I would be surprised. What we've seen from most of them is that they want to go back to physical, or they want to go back to hybrid. Now this one might be different, but that's what we've seen in general. Is everyone wants to go back to what they know, and so they're not that because the problem that they have is they don't understand. When you don't understand digital, it looks like the costs will go way down. You'll have a lot less people. You'll make less money. All those things. What they're not really getting their head around is the fact that if you really build a true digital first event at large scale, what you're talking about is having 20 or 30 physical locations around the world that are all in a theater that all need registration, all need catering, all need all those other things so that you can be in, and this is not that new. This is what Google would do for Google I/O. They had tons of watch parties all over the world for Google I/O, where it allowed their local representatives to mingle with their local developers and so on and so forth. And so this is all something that can be done, but that becomes a logistically actually much more complicated than it was before, and but more effective in a lot of ways. You'll end up with a lot of people that weren't going to go, and especially now aren't going to go to a physical event. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and Maritz has been in the business for many decades. and they have a lot invested in contracts with convention centers and hotels. And I don't think they're going to, I think the fear of having everything move to virtual, which would kind of obsolete a lot of what they do, would have them be shy about dipping their toe into that water.
Yeah. Again, I think most people put a digital sign up because they didn't know how long this was going to last, and they still don't know how long it's going to last as we go into potentially a rough fall. Next question.
Aaron Isaac's in Rochester, New York is next. I made some animated lower thirds in Keynote and exported as 444 with transparency. The file plays on my Mac, but it will not play back correctly on my Hyperdeck. It sees the files, says that it's playing, but no image even on the Hyperdeck display.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
It's not in the specs to play 444, only 422. I put it in Mukana.
Oh, yeah, it depends on which Hyperdeck you're talking about. If it's a Hyperdeck Mini, it will play 444. Go ahead, Karl.
That's correct. So the new Hyperdeck Mini will play 444. It'll only play in HD, and it won't send out an alpha channel. The only way to do an alpha channel with Blackmagic equipment is with the DeckLink cards, and you'll need software to send independent channels.
Well, we've absolutely done key fill out of a Hyperdeck Mini. You know, so we've definitely
HD only or 4K, because it's HD, limited to HD.
I think it might be. We may have only done HD because we.
Yeah, it's limited to HD. That's the only way you can do it. Yeah. So if you want to go 4K, you'll have to use DeckLink cards.
There you go. Yeah. So the but for 1080p, we've definitely been successful at getting key fill out of the Mini. And so what if it doesn't work? What you want to do is go take that file into compressor, set it to the 444 setting in compressor, and push it out. I know that Keynote should write it the same way as compressor, but just try it. So, and what you do is I find a way, what I want to play out of my Hyperdeck, I find that solution, and I have a setting that's called 422 conform, 4444 conform. Everything goes through it before it goes to the Hyperdeck. Like I don't think about it. I just kind of push it through that way. Next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael, often questioner here. What are the most common software tools to use for live broadcast graphics like 3D traffic? Wouldn't it take a lot of time to import said data into an engine like Unreal Engine 4?
So there's a lot of for broadcast graphics, like traditional broadcast graphics. You're talking about Chiron, VizRT, Expression. Those are the ones that are kind of built for, for what you see on a regular TV broadcast. There are many things that can be done in software that are a lot more, they're a lot more flexible. So, blue graphics, I can't think, Blue True or Blue something.
Blue Effects.
Blue Effects graphics are another one. Softron makes its own on-the-air graphics tool that will work on it. And then, of course, you have software that can just simply do it. So you have Mimo Live. If you look at, Oliver showing that Mimo Live, you also have Vmix, OBS. All of those can take live data and translate those into graphics, and it's just built into the switcher. In addition to that, you can do web graphics. We just did this for a race. It was a road race where we went and were grabbing the telemetry data live and just posting it to a web page and keying it over. It was a really low grade way to do it, but you can definitely build a web page over black to luma key or over green to color key. And, or even, and so you can depend on how you want to do it, but we just did it and it was, live data being updated. So, it's just a matter of, and then there's ones like TriCasters that have tools that are really built for scoreboards and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of options to make that work. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again, and this time he says, when you're using a meter when interviewing someone with less technical experience, how do you coach them in setting up their microphone gain properly when they're using a standard mic on most likely a Windows PC?
Go ahead, Rupert.
When dealing with non-technical people, the number one thing is to put them at ease and to not put this into being a stressful environment. So you want to try and do this ahead of time. Pick a time that works for them. Don't just cold call and try and do it on the spot. Work with them. Explain to them why. Maybe show them examples of what the end goal is, or let them listen to the difference. Try and ship them a mic if you can ahead of time with an external interface with a volume control. That'll just make it really tactile for them. Try and make sure you're prepped with something like TeamViewer or some one-to-one support tool so you can remote in there and help them tweak the settings if they need to. Just be polite and patient. Remember to get them to wear headphones so you don't get a feedback, and retest right before your event.
Go ahead, Karl.
So worst case scenario, they're using open speakers and the mics they've built into their laptop. You want to find out how you can control gain for them, for their operating system and the software they're using. Maybe make a little slideshow to point them to where they have to go in their operating system to bring it down, and then put their audio into a separate mixer so you can control it. As long as they're not distorting, then you can control it at your end if it's that critical.
Go ahead, Bill.
And very quickly, remember that they're gonna test like this, and then they're gonna come on like this. There's a certain energy and adrenaline that happens when things go live, and people tend to get substantially louder in their presentation. So just be ready for that.
Next question.
Moving on, Johnny Estias in Manila in the Philippines says, following up on an update from Alex on the Monoprice 8x8 HDMI matrix.
I'm still working on it. You'll notice that I haven't been in a lot of the pre shows. I have an event next week, Monday. And so you'll notice that I become less and less available. And as I'm working on things, a variety of moving parts right now. So when we get through Monday, I'll have a little bit more time. I'm going to be working on getting the thing up for Andy so that we can do the ZoomISOs and rebuilding this. That's what I'm in the process of, is pulling apart my studio again, putting it back together, which is I do this about every couple months. And so it's part of the update to that process. Next question.
Nick Goodfriend.
Go ahead, Karl. You were going to say.
I just wanted to ask, have you got one and does it strip HDCP?
I have one and it appears to do HDCP. so I played that through it and it seemed that part seems to work. It's just me. What I have to do is sit down and literally just draw out. I know that, I want a couple monitors, but instead of plugging everything in, I have to kind of draw it like this is what all these matrices are going to do and which monitors it's going to go to. Next question. I can't hear you, Bill.
Oh, I'm sorry. It comes from Nick Goodfriend in Bedford, New York. And he says, having absorbed much of the info on the recommended office hours kit and process, I'm beginning installation for a CEO's streaming and broadcast studio. I have about 24 foot by 24 foot, 7 foot floor to ceiling with background lights and gear. Is that just too small?
Go ahead, Karl.
The size is the problem there, the more square shape. So you want to make sure you got a lot of soft furnishings in that room if you can, or just soft baffles, because a square room is just going to have standing waves no matter which microphone they have. So get as much soft furnishings as you can in there. 24 foot is not a problem as long as they're at one end of the room and you can have the camera and the lights at the other end of the room. As much broad light as you can, maybe even just spin the lights around and point them at a white wall, get you extremely broad lighting. But yeah, it's more the squared nature of the room. It'll get interesting.
Yeah, the ceiling height is very low. Like that's the thing that would probably 7 feet is very low ceiling. So I would take a look at that as far as being able to mount lights and so on and so forth. If that's a drop ceiling, I would consider pulling the drop ceiling out, or at least mounting stuff so that the lights are very flushed with that ceiling, because you drop below 7 feet and now you're really getting to a point where people are literally walking into the lights. So that's the challenge that I would look at. If it's a drop ceiling, you can usually get up higher, pull the lights right up to it, or even take the drop ceiling out. 24 is, as Karl said, is plenty of space. This fact that it's square you may want to do things that break up the squareness of it. Or the thing that I've been working in a couple of rooms that basically what they did is they suspended out, they pushed out 6 inches, then they have fabric going all the way around it. Behind that is all foam that's absorbing everything, and that sounds great. It seems to eliminate pretty much everything. So that might be something you want to look at. But 24 feet is plenty of big space, unless if they start to want to have people sitting around for a round table, it'll get tight. But we've done it. The studio we had in DC was 28 by 18, and we made that work, but just barely. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I just quickly measured 7 foot is the height. I have a very tall ceiling, but I've got my light mounted on an arm, and that just fits under the 7 foot limit there.
Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
If it's a CEO level and he has money to spend, you could also do really cool tricks like put in a hidden area with a motorized curtain track and just curtain surround him or her when they're on air. That'll cover all these audio problems.
Yeah. Rose Brand is your friend. So Rose Brand with some railings. We built a maze of railings within our studio, so that with Rose Brand, with both the railings and what you're looking for is 100% fullness end, and then you're looking for a real thick velvet that's going to absorb stuff. So that's another, to Bill's point, that can also work well. Next question.
Moving on, Johnny Estias is up next, and he says, can anyone recommend a Thunderbolt 3 PCIe enclosure so that I can use a DeckLink Duo with a Mac Mini?
Go ahead, Karl.
Other World Computing, Intel Mac Mini. Not sure about the M1.
Go ahead, Oliver.
Sonnet Technologies makes a couple of enclosures that also work quite well, and they will also work with the M1. I'm using one, so.
Yep, you're coming in really low, Oliver, as well. And Sonnet, I just bought 5 Sonnets for a Duo. So it's not for, I didn't buy it for 3 cards. I bought 1 card each because that's all I needed. But Sonnet makes a solid, we've been using those for years. The next question.
Comes from Douglas Carmichael, and he says, Alex, you mentioned using SDI for ZoomISO output in the office hours 2.0 setup. Wouldn't SDI run the risk of creating cable spaghetti versus a clean video over Ethernet setup like NDI?
Clean video over Ethernet like NDI, that, for me, that doesn't really add up. So especially when I'm dealing with 20 signals, and potentially 40 signals, the bandwidth across that back is not something that I would. It's not something. I'm not going to put a show on that. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I love NDI. I just had that problem this morning where I did do that, and I turned on my NDI, and for some reason it wasn't going to my streams. It was breaking up. I had to stop and restart. I ended up stopping my stream 3 times for it to work properly.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So cable management has been discussed many times on office hours. I try and find those segments and research some of that stuff.
Yeah, this kit is going to be pretty tightly cabled. So everything goes in. It's going to be, I have 20 signals that are going out of those into a router, and then from the router into a constellation, and then from there, then I have some spaghetti. But all of those are all sitting right next to each other, so they're nice little short cables, that are able to be used for that. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's in next with Oliver. Would you ever see SRT support being added to Mimo Live?
Go ahead, Oliver.
It's certainly an option. NDI 5 has some interesting new functionality that makes it probably less important for us right now, but it's absolutely a future direction.
Next question.
Comes from Aki Vermalalainen. I hope I'm getting that close. In my experience, Zoom does not always give FHD resolution. How would you guarantee FHD in your show?
Full HD is what I'm guessing that means. The first thing that you have to do is you have to get 1080p, and you have to have a business reason to do it. Now you can get 720. That's relatively, but what you're trying to do is get the full HD, and that's a case-by-case basis, I believe. Go ahead, Jonas.
Yeah, exactly. You need that flip switch by support. Then you need all the people that are transmitting video to enable the HD flag. And then a new thing to look out for if you have a Zoom room and are pulling over NDI, or you have a Zoom room at all that's only capable of 720p. As soon as that Zoom room pins somebody, it will go down to 720p. So that's something to look out for too.
Go ahead, Rupert.
Even if you do get it allowed by Zoom, you then need to enable it in your web settings. You need to enable group HD first at 720, and then if you get it enabled by Zoom to 1080.
Next question.
Jonas Dattel, Jonas in Reutlingen, Germany. Which Mac is the best one to get for playout, Intel or M1?
Go ahead, Karl.
M1, because you can just use iOS apps if they're allowed to. Just gives you more flexibility for playout. I have no. Yeah, as far as like the chipset, that won't really matter, but the M1's going to give you more options for playout.
Yeah, go ahead, Oliver.
It's a price performance thing. So the M1, just get 2 M1s for the same price for the Intel ones that perform much better. So
yeah, I wouldn't buy into the Intel at this point. it's the M1 performance is so much higher. Even if you have to wait a little while for everything to be there, I wouldn't purchase an Intel machine at this point. Next question.
Keenan Campbell in Princeton, Illinois says panel's recommendation for ultra heavy HDMI cables, 15 to 20 foot, prices no object over durability.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, knowing what Keenan does in emergency management, I would say to get a patch panel first, because the protection that you want is where you don't want to bust that thing at the switcher. So you want to, if you're in an emergency situation, I would rather have a short hop into a panel that's nearby. So I Googled and tried to find a nice heavy duty HDMI cable, and Triplet has some stuff with some nice ends. I'd probably look at those. I wasn't able to find anything broadcast. We'd usually go to SDI or fiber with the military grade locking connectors if we were to do something like that.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again. Let's say a production requires an on-site nurse or medic. Are there agencies specific to our industry that can provide them?
Go ahead, Karl.
There definitely is. So just check your state's local health and safety, generally whatever the workplace health and safety, and they'll actually have a list. So your state government will actually have a list of providers in your state that do that for workplaces.
Rupert?
Yeah, you certainly want to stay out of the liability chain on that one. But in many areas, you can hire the Red Cross to do this as a paid service. Also, in some areas, you can pay the fire department or the local EMS to do it too as a paid service.
Next question.
Vienna, Austria. It doesn't say whom. Oh, Vienna from Australia. I'm sorry, I've done that before. And the question is, I'm having issues with a 2010 Boss audio interface not showing up on my M1 Mac. The Boss audio drivers are installed, yet I'm not seeing anything listed in the audio MIDI setup.
And this is a 2010. Is that a? Let's see.
Is that the year or the model number?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know, if it's a 20, well, what I will say is if it's 2010, if it's 2010, the year, there could be all kinds of driver issues. If it's a, let's see here. Yeah, I don't see a, I think that the problem I'm having is finding the interface itself. If it's from the year 2010, chances of it working on something new is running slim, you know, especially on an M1. So if it's 11 years old, I would not expect it to work at this point. If it's a model number, you might have to give us more information, because even when I searched it, I couldn't find it. So, but thanks, Vienna. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back in with, which type of EQ would be best for removing harshness from a synth known for high-end brassiness? Would a more precise EQ work best like an API 560 or FabFilter Pro Q3, or would a broader EQ be better like a Pultec plugin?
Go ahead, Karl.
Please don't use EQs on synths unless you're actually in the mastering stage and you want to fit the synth into the mix of a complete song. For synths, they have filters. So filters are how you shape the sound of a synth and not EQs. Pretty much use the filter and the resonance. So play around with those two dials. Every subtractive synth will have those. That's where you'll shape the sound. EQs are only used to fit a synth into a mix, and generally synthesizers are actually shaped at the beginning in their sound design to fit into the song.
Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
I relate this to lighting and gels. If the lighting fixture isn't putting out a full spectrum, gels don't work the same way because there's no light to filter. Same thing, I think, with audio. Unless you have a full spectrum start, you can't filter.
Go next question.
Douglas Carmichael's next. He says, would a SiriKit API be interfaced to Mukana to allow users to ask questions of the archive, Office Hours archives via voice? Interesting.
That kind of stuff's on the roadmap, but probably pretty far out right now. That's a lot of work. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back. If I use the Elgato Wave Mic ARM LP or similar for my mic, would I have enough desk headroom for an Allen & Heath SQ series console? The SQs are notorious for their steep curve in front, as shown here. And Jeffrey Powers has one up in the.
Go ahead, Karl.
So if you're going to have a console put on a side desk, it's not going to be on your main desk with the keyboard and mouse and the things you get. It's something you'll set and forget generally.
Yeah, I don't think it'll work. No, I think that would be too steep. Next question.
And it's just like the last one in first hour that I see here. And it says, for playout, is there any benefit from a MacBook versus a Mac Mini?
The main thing, go ahead, Karl.
MacBook has a built-in UPS. That's about it.
Yeah, so there's the installed UPS, known as the battery, is there. So that is a big advantage. By the way, for the producers, we actually cranked through those. We were very effective, and there was a lot of questions on YouTube. If you have a couple more general questions, you can throw them in there. But the one or two more. I think that the big advantage of the Mac Mini is that it's just got a lot more I/O. So that helps a lot as far as getting things out. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, one advantage you have is you have a screen built into the MacBook. If you have a playout device that has a separate user interface that you can slide onto the second screen, then you can control your playout and keep your playout completely clean of user interface, and just use the secondary output of the Mac Mini and put your control interface on the screen of the Mac Mini.
And the nice thing with the Mac Mini is that you can also, lots of rack mounts. So you can just stack up, we've had them where we've had 10 or 12 of them all racked together doing lots of different things. And it's just nice and small and compact. And we just use remote desktop to get into each one of them to set them up, especially if it's a set and forget kind of setup. It works well. Now let's go to the next question.
Okay, and I'm sorry, got all sorts of traffic outside today. Rupert McCrae of Dallas, Texas is next with any thoughts on Redbox? Yes, the DVD kiosk operator. Their kiosk seems steadfast in many neighborhood spots. They appear to have some paid and free online streaming options also, but where can they go?
Nowhere. Go, Karl.
So with these kind of old delivery services, if they're still making money versus the cost of maintaining, they'll keep them in line. As soon as that equation goes into the negative, as far as their upkeep is more expensive than what they're making, then they'll take them offline.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Doesn't Redbox run on a franchise model now as opposed to regular distribution?
I don't know. They may have changed that over so that might be part of the deal. I mean, there's still people out there with DVDs. When we talk about accessibility and everything else, there's still people out there that don't have the bandwidth, to watch anything else. They don't have they just don't have the access to it. So Redbox can probably in some communities still be able to maintain enough people to the point. It's not very expensive to run them. They're just sitting there. They don't need to, it depends on what the cost is of actually running them. If it's not very high, it may work fine. Go ahead, Courtney.
And a lot of people, when they're traveling, they have DVD systems in their cars to keep the kids entertained. And so that's a good choice for that.
Yep. Next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle from here in the panel says, does Jonas have anything to report on his first show?
I think it went really well. What really helped, I had Track as my producer, so I never looked at the chat directly. So I had just a filtered view of all the questions. And what by rewatching it, what I found really, really cool is he used the questions to emphasize what I say. For example, during the countdown, it was all the hello messages. But if I talked about something and there was a fitting chat message, he used that, or like just brought on chat messages, which I think helped a lot with all the stuff. And then Guy was on to check the YouTube feed, so I never had to check that part and could focus on delivering what I wanted to deliver.
I think one thing that underlines for a lot of us is that how we've learned that teams work well. Teaming up with a handful of people, and especially as you, especially for those of us in the panel, but if you're even in Discord or working on it, using this team to kind of build up a couple people that'll help with your stream will definitely make it a lot smoother than anything you can do by yourself. Next question.
Rupert McCrae here in the panel from Dallas, Texas. Is prefixing websites with www an outdated concept?
Ken.
Not really, depending on where they're being delivered. I mean, if they're in print, and because now with domain names like officehours.global, if you just had that, people might not recognize that being a website. So adding the www is to get people to understand, oh, that is a web address, because the extensions are so varied now that it might not read as it being a website at all. So it's they're not needed, but they do help in readability on recognizing people to recognize it's a website.
The other thing that's interesting is I still question, like for instance, with Office Hours, we just chose to not use .com. So the .com.net nomenclature is kind of, I think that's becoming more blasé, as far as that process. Go ahead, Rupert.
I just wonder also, to extend on Ken's point, whether the readability also extends into, emails or any written format where your browser or your email client may, auto link it to make it a clickable link, whether, the www helps it recognize that.
It does. Absolutely. Next question.
Comes from Mike Burns in Spokane, Washington. My kids are hacking through my screen time settings in their iPhones. Any other parents on the panel feeling any pain? They are making this tech dad look pretty sad.
Karl?
So if you're trying to administer their iPhones through screen time, you can also administer it via not changing the settings. So you can put parental controls and turn, because they have to change settings like time zone and those kind of things, on location. If they change those settings, then they can hack into it. By going into parental controls and turning on not able to change any settings within the settings app, that's another way of doing it. You can stop them from doing that.
There's also the my kids are on a separate Wi-Fi SSID, and it's timed. so the thing is that you can, and if there's any variance in how they're using the stuff, like trying to work things around, then it just gets turned off. so things get, it can get a lot worse really fast. So it's and then you have Open DNS and other things that you can use to start controlling it. So it's there's always heavier handed ways of doing it. And the thing to remind people of is, if you get outside of the small rules, larger rules can be created, and you just have to know what those are. Go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, though, if you ask your kid to describe what a VPN is, and if they do a better job than you do, all hope is lost. So
well, again, with a separate SSID, the thing is that you just turn it off, and then all the devices that are connected to it are no longer operational. So next question. They just have to get to the main SSID, which would be hard. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with, even though IPv6 has been around since 1995, why haven't we seen a wholesale shift to it across the internet and the retirement of IPv4? We've
talked about this a fair bit. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, we need more JJs for that to happen.
The issue is that the ability to look at it in regular terms and just know what the numbers are, and being able to remember what those numbers are and visualize them is one of the biggest reasons people won't do it, because you're basically, unless you really understand the how it's set up, which most people don't, it's just gobbledygook, and so so that becomes much harder for people to just type in. They have to cut and paste everything into it, and so as a result, most people try to avoid it. Go ahead, Rupert.
Also, remember what happened to IPv5. I mean, there was a 5 in the middle. That was an experimental protocol, and then they developed it into IPv6. So who knows? They could jump to IPv7 in the next 10 years.
Well, I think IPv6 will be pretty useful for a while, but the fundamental problem has been readability. Without the readability, it just didn't. I think that's what kept it from taking off. Go ahead, Oliver.
Yeah, and I also I tried to find easy to use tutorial on how to set an IPv6 network here at home in my office, and I couldn't find any. So if anybody has any pointers to something that is like how to do this, then
yeah, go ahead, Rupert.
You have to learn hex and binary, do that, and then IPv6 will make sense.
That's the problem. that's why it hasn't been adopted. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael has an interesting one here. Film financing, he writes, was one of the sectors affected by the 2008 financial crisis. Do you think adopting Rebel Mac unit practices, small teams, prosumer hardware, flat management, and so forth, would reduce production costs while still creating quality content?
I think that what's really doing that in a lot of ways is the massive undertaking of Netflix and other folks of building their own studios and then building standards and building, they're flattening out all of those things. I don't think people understand the scale. I mean, maybe a year ago, I was talking to a VFX producer at Netflix, who told me that they were 900 producers short. For what they were doing. You got to wrap your head around that. It's just massive scale of producing. And so they are probably pushing more towards those high quality solutions. The other thing that's interesting is just what kind of content we want to watch. I think that people are finding that standard broadcast fare is starting to fall off. People are able to fill their time with lots of other things. And so that's becoming a larger and larger struggle when you look at the cumes. Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, you can look up like the democratization of media or the decentralization of stuff like that. But also in teams, in companies and organizations, I've over the years found them to be cyclical. Their big teams will have a new way of looking at something and spread out into smaller teams, and then time will pass and they'll find some way that it would be better to work together, and then years pass and the same thing happens again.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill. Can't hear you, Bill.
Oh, I'm sorry. I always think it's content driven. If you've got a script like My Dinner with Andre, which famously was one location, two people talking through the entire movie, that is possible to pull off with a relatively modest budget. A Transformers movie obviously cannot be accomplished with a modest budget. It just doesn't work that way. So the content has to be tailored for economy and say something in a not complex way. Well, not complex way, because you can say complex things, but I think you get the point. It depends on your goal.
But I think
kind of content.
I think the other challenge people are going to have is that more and more people want something that's really specific to what they're interested in. So, my kids watch stuff that from a production quality is very low, but they love watching it, and they stonks. Anyone knows what stonks is, and they watch these things that someone puts together by themselves. And so the question is how does that, and TikTok kind of showed that for a little while until it got much better, because people were making money. So YouTube, we saw that transition of people doing it with their handy cam, and now people are using 8K cameras and everything else. And so I think that the kind of content and that ultimate customization is going to be a really interesting process and very difficult to manage for folks that are doing this in general. Next question.
Is pretty much
we are now we'll do one more question here, and then we're going to move to YouTube.
Yeah, this is pretty much our standard. What is the audio plugin that can be seen in the office hours grid? We handle this reasonably frequently.
That is the Waves. What was it? Waves meters? WLM. Yep. Waves level meters. WLM is what we use there. All right. Let's change subjects here to, we're going to move to talking about YouTube streaming. I would normally say that we're going to talk for 10 minutes about it and then jump into it, but we have so many questions. I think we're just going to jump into the questions, and we'll see where we go from there. Go ahead. First question.
Okay. The first question, from Dan H. And Dan H says, I've heard it discussed before, but could you describe what view can't output from Zoom in the YouTube stream? Was it the multi-pin?
Yeah, if you multi-pin, if you multi-spotlight two things, two people, you'll only see one of them. And I believe it's the first one. I mean, I think the second one is just ignored. So if you do multi-spotlights, they do not reflect I think they now reflect in the web viewer of Zoom, but they will not reflect in the Zoom output. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So this is actually the first time I cut in a long time. And this is really weird because there's a lot of changes that have happened in the last at least 2 months since I last cut. The biggest one is if I go into view and I go to, and I say follow host view or speaker view or gallery view, that only affects the attendees. It doesn't affect the YouTube anymore. I actually have to change my own personal view to have it affect how it looks into YouTube, which once again, you weren't able to, if you had a 2-screen experience, it didn't do that. So I think there's a small bug here, and I'm going to actually report it to Zoom. So hopefully that multi-pin will be.
No, the multi-pin has never worked in Zoom. I mean, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, if you wanted that 2-up look out to YouTube, you could either screen scrape it, or you can have your fellow panelists mute their video. So right now, I don't know if you guys want to do this, but we could just have everybody turn off their video except for 2 people, and then switch to gallery view, and then it looks pristine on YouTube. I mean, the resolution is tight. It doesn't do that switching thing when 2 people are talking back and forth.
That's why we like ZoomISO. Next question. I can't hear you, Bill.
Tim Mann of Melbourne, Australia says, what's the office hours signal chain to get such good audio into YouTube?
It is everybody having great mics. So, we have a unique situation here, which is we pay a lot of attention to both our video and audio quality, and there's nothing in Zoom that we're doing that's any different. The reason it sounds good is because all the panelists here work so hard on it, and so they have almost everybody has very strong mics that definitely improve the quality. I would argue that most of the time we sound as good or better than most radio shows, including NPR that uses phoners that I hate. Anyway, if you're watching from NPR, we would love for you to send mics out. That's all I'm saying. I know you're trying to gather news, but just get a whole bunch of them because it's the phone thing is hard to listen to. Next question.
Daniel Goldstein is up next from Washington, D.C., and he says, what's the practical bitrate limit for an RTMP signal to YouTube, especially if we have a high bandwidth Zixi signal transmuxed by AWS? We'd want to send YouTube as high a bitrate as it can possibly handle.
So there's two arguments there. Highest bitrate, I think, is 36 megs. The highest recommended is, I think, 30. 30 megs, I think, is the highest recommended by YouTube. And usually you're doing that if you're doing an HLS stream with like 10-bit 4K, that kind of thing. There is allowing YouTube to do some of that work for you, some of the compression. When you pre-compress it, you do a quantization of the image with your encoder. And if you have a really good encoder, you may actually do it better than YouTube would, because YouTube is a generalized encoder. So getting it close to what your top tier is sometimes will lead to a higher quality image. If your encoder is not as good, then you want to just send it as much data as you can so that YouTube can do it for you. And you have to kind of do some color and resolution tests to figure out what that looks like. And a lot of times it has to do with motion, of how that's handled. So it just depends on what encoders you're using or what you're using to encode to YouTube. But I wouldn't go over 30 megs. 30 megs a second is as high as you want to go on for ingest, and that's much higher than other services. Other services might throw that away if you do that. So you want to test anything that you do there, but YouTube should handle. The most I've sent is 36 is to it in 4K. Next question.
Kind of related. Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas wants to know if it's a worthwhile endeavor to try to stream and upload in 4K to YouTube.
Go ahead, Karl.
Yes, definitely. So YouTube, since the pandemic started, they've been really compressing H.264, which is 1080 and below. Their 4K is a WebM wrapper with their own V9 format, I believe, and it's much better, much smoother. It's analogous to H.265.
Even at 1080, it looks really good. So when you give it a 4K source, the 1080 source on YouTube is sharper, in my opinion, than normally. Go ahead, Jonas.
Have you tested sending uprising a 1080p signal, sending it as 4K to YouTube, just to see if the 1080p then still looks better?
I haven't done that. It'd be an interesting test. Yeah, it wouldn't be a hard test to do either. Maybe we'll jump into that sometime in the next week or two. I will say that it just looks. I mean, it looks stunning when you're able to stream to 4K. There have been occasionally, when we first started doing it, you'd see a little bit more dropout. It'd be a little less stable, but now we're using HLS to stream 4K. So you can set up an HLS ingest for YouTube, and it looks pretty good. It seems to be more stable than the RTMP. Next question.
Rupert McCrae here on the panel, Dallas, Texas. What does the landscape look for YouTube over the next few years? Facebook plans to pay $1 billion to creators through next year to bring content to its platform. Will that impact YouTube?
Jeffrey?
Facebook is still a walled garden over YouTube, which is very public and very embeddable. So yeah, it's going to be tough. Facebook would have to open up some doors to really compete what YouTube's got.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, obviously YouTube is owned by Google, and it's more becoming their search engine. The way that they're linking YouTube videos to Google is going to be a key thing. So yeah, I think Google are investing a lot into YouTube for the search engine part.
When we look at the advantages of YouTube over Facebook, one of the things that we look at is that the fact that the average view time is typically 10 to 12 times higher in YouTube over Facebook. And that's because of the feed. The feed that brings everybody into a Facebook event takes them all out of it. You do one thing that's a little bit boring and everyone's like, okay, I'm now going to go on. What are my friends doing now? Or what else is on there? And that becomes, and so people just wander off of Facebook. Facebook's better for a momentary impact. So what Facebook's really good at is promoting your YouTube videos. So talking about them, gathering people and getting them interested, and then pushing them over to YouTube when they're doing it. Now, Facebook will penalize you for putting up YouTube videos into your Facebook feed, but you can be using your Facebook to let people know that it's happening. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, for Facebook to really help on that, they'd have to actually be able to turn off notifications, because that's what happens is you're watching it, notification pops in the bottom corner that somebody liked a video, and then you're off to that video or that picture or whatever.
Yeah, it's just too easy to click off of it and go back to your feed in Facebook. So I think that's the issue. Go ahead, Rupert.
Yeah, I just think $1 billion means they might change a few things.
It might. But a lot of companies have spent a lot of money on creators before. The problem is that the creators now look at it as viewership and following versus, a lot of the creators that have a good following are making a lot of money. Like $1 billion doesn't go that far. When the big creators that would actually help you are making millions of dollars a year already. So you're talking about a mere couple hundred, that are really going to make it. They're really going to move the needle. And that's the fundamental problem. What Facebook needs to do is Facebook took over because they allowed your entire Facebook audience to be notified when you went live. That's what's killing them. So that when, because they clamped down, what killed people using Facebook on Facebook for live was that they took away the viral spread of your videos. So they can spend all the money they want until they put that back in. Because when you do it on YouTube, everybody knows that it's happening. They get an email, not everyone, but a lot of people do. But that viral spread was lethal when Facebook did it. And when they took it away, people realized they weren't getting any more viewers. At that point, they weren't getting any more viewers than they were getting on YouTube, and the YouTube average view time was higher. So it didn't make any sense to keep on doing it to Facebook when they took that away, because they didn't have anything special at that point. Next question.
Dan Hubert in Erie, Pennsylvania. I've heard it discussed before that certain views don't output from Zoom when streaming to YouTube. Was it multi-pin? Is that the same if you use a custom stream? I think we had that question. We talked about it.
Yep. Go ahead. Next question. Go ahead. Can't hear you.
Yeah, hang on a second. I'm just trying to get up to the answer.
I think you might have deleted one.
Might YouTube TV develop a free ad-supported TV offering, to compete with FTA broadcast?
Go ahead, Karl.
So my guess is the reason why YouTube TV costs like a subscription is because they've got to give that to the free-to-air broadcasters to essentially restream their content. So my guess is in their contract, they're not allowed to sell new ads against that content. That'll be part of that's why they're charging for it.
The reason they're charging for it is because they had to replace the sub cost per person, so subscriber costs. So when you're paying for cable, what made cable work was that everybody gets the same thing, and this is why everything's now more expensive. And we all said that when people said, "Oh, I want to unbundle my cable network," anyone that worked in cable was like, "That is a horrible idea. You're going to pay a lot more money if you have to unwrap it," because the problem is you can't maintain the network. A TV network unless everybody pays into it. When only the people who want it pay into it, then each one of them has to be more expensive to make it work. So you would pay $8 a sub for you might pay $8 a sub for HBO, $2 a sub for ESPN, 50 cents a sub or $1 a sub for Prime Sports Network. That's where I used to work. That's now part of Fox Sports, but you would pay different amounts, and all that adds up to your basic cable subscription. So why is your basic cable subscription and the next cable subscription more expensive? Is because they're paying those subscription costs back to, and so that's what YouTube's doing. YouTube's paying them probably the exact same number that they're getting paid for that number. Now, YouTube does sell new ads. So YouTube is selling that ads over top of that, and those are being split with the broadcasters, but they just haven't, they haven't sold all the inventory. So when you see something just blank without the ads, it means that they haven't sold the inventory, for that, for that piece. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I remember, I don't know if it was Comcast or Cox or something like that, but they offered with their service YouTube TV in the premium level. So I would guess that, if you find if they find a sponsor that'll take care of all the ads, you won't have ads.
Yeah. So but I will say that YouTube TV is, I use it because as my replacement for cable, mostly because I'm playing on a browser and I can screen grab it for reference. So I actually do it from a professional reason, so that when I want to gather super sources or lower thirds or examples. If you look at the teardowns that I did long ago on the Pixel Core YouTube page, those were all me screen scraping those. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so my favorite feature in YouTube TV is the unlimited DVR storage. I'm a news junkie, and I just tape all the news.
I have all of it, like all the news organizations and all the things that are regular that I might have any interest in, because it's not DVRing it. It's not recording it. It's just setting metadata. You're just getting in and out points. Like, it's just like, oh, that person wants that in and out point. And so it's super efficient, and I have everything. So if a news thing breaks out and I want to go back and look at all the news, I just go back and I can look at literally every newscast around the world that is available on YouTube TV and cut through it. It's pretty amazing. Next question
comes from Jonas Dattel of Reutlingen here in the panel. After a stream is done, should you upload parts as single videos?
It's a pretty popular thing to do, is to upload sections and grab onto what we call snackable content. So grab some highlight, grab another piece there. We don't do it here just because it would just be more work for Jeffrey. So it's a lot of clipping to do that. I do think that as we move forward, we're probably going to try to find ways that we can clip it live, so that people can be sitting there and actually clipping stuff that might make sense and putting them out. It is very effective because it gives people just the one thing that you want them to see. And there's some Snappy and there's some other services that can actually let you clip it while it's streaming. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, well, for YouTube, that's why they had the chapter markers put in, because you then didn't need to make all the clips. All you had to do is put down the timestamp and go, or just grab the embed with the timestamp. But if you want to go to Facebook or something like that, yeah, you definitely have to.
The other advantage is that you may not have the whole show. The whole show may not be representative of what you want to send to viewers. So, you had some rough spots at the beginning or rough spots in the middle, and you don't necessarily want people to really look at the whole thing. You just want to have them look at what you want them to see. So that's another reason to just split out the clips into playlists of highlights. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael is interested in how the panel would compare the discoverability of streams on YouTube versus things like Twitch and similar platforms.
Yeah, for the most part, I find that the discoverability is pretty good. I mean, mostly because it can be linked. YouTube does a fair bit of cross-platform. I don't find Twitch to be. I think Twitch is something you earn. I don't find that discoverability to be super high. Go ahead, Rupert.
It depends what your approach vector is. If you're searching in Google, like the video results you get in Google might point you in several directions: YouTube, Switch, or Vimeo. It'll pick up videos from multiple platforms.
Yeah, but I do think that I think YouTube's discoverability is probably one of the best as far as pure discoverability. But it is also, each one of these have their own cultures, so what they expect and how they expect you to deliver it. Some of the discoverability, I will admit, I think Jeffrey probably can be more that we don't spend much time on. Thumbnails are really important. I didn't realize how, in some discussions with some YouTubers, I didn't really realize how important the thumbnails are, but we're going to start focusing on that as we go into September, but we haven't focused on it yet. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, thumbnails. They say that what you want to do is, of course, 1280 by 720. You want to bring up the contrast. You want to sharpen the image, and you want to focus on things with the text being in a most readable. That's the biggest problem, is people put all these frilly texts into the thumbnails, and when it's super small, you can't read it. So you got to have good distinctive text into the thumbnails, and you get a lot more views off that.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
So the thumbnails remind me of the old years ago when actors had their headshot and they would have like 4 different pictures. One's like, "Hey, I'm wacky. Hey, I'm serious," and that's what thumbnails remind me of.
Yep.
They're kind of like that.
They're effective. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, the one thing also with thumbnails is the consistency of the coloring or the font and stuff that you're using. By changing that look is it really does affect discoverability. You kind of get a good example if you look at twit.tv. They change it around all the time, and so sometimes you wouldn't even know that was actually a Twitch show. The consistency of where you're positioning those graphics is important for.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
And some services I use, like VidBlaster, I use TubeBuddy. They have A/B testing, so you can actually put 2 thumbnails in, and then it'll switch it back and forth, and you can find which one works best for you.
That's great. Go ahead, Bill.
Might be useful to look back at the old advertising standards for billboards, and they were really tough. 7 words, because at speed you can't read more than that. Consistency of look, consistency of color, that's how you build campaigns rather than just disparate billboards.
And for someone who's going to eventually ask why we haven't done it, is because I really we put our videos up right now as a service to our members so that they have it recorded somewhere. And we're about to start doing something more public. So you'll see us do a lot of different things that are us experimenting with expansion. But the goal was really to build up the community and to strengthen that before we started trying to add lots of people or add lots of viewers. So it was really, the reason that we don't do a lot of that up until now is because primarily what this is designed for is just for people who couldn't make it. It's like a DVR of what we're doing that is easy to manage. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back with, how aggressive is YouTube's copyright infringement detection on live streams? Have you had issues with false positive detections cutting streams off?
Early on, absolutely. So, there was, YouTube is under a lot of pressure because of how they started they had to deal with a lot of lawsuits. They had to make a lot of people happy. And now they have a lot of relationships with one of the largest music playouts, locations in the world. There's lots of people watching movies and copyright, and they're trying to build those relationships with traditional verticals. And so you're going to have the sensitivity of that. Now, what they did do is they learned to back off a little bit. It used to be a couple of years ago, anything that was remotely copyright infringement would lead to a strike, and they would take you would get a big warning on the live, and it would give you like 60 seconds to turn off whatever you were doing, and then boom, it would just take it off. We haven't seen that in a long time. And partially that's because YouTube has made it a little bit more flexible. And also because the copyright holders started to realize that they were kind of cutting their nose off to spite their face. So the copyright holders were educated, or became more educated, in the idea that it's okay if people, we won't let them monetize it. So we'll take their ability to take money. The most common thing that they'll do is they'll flag it, and then you just can't make any money on it, but they're not going to stop you from putting it up. And so that's been a big shift in the approach. Go ahead, Rupert.
Is there a difference between it detecting copyrighted material, like let's say music or playout pieces, to rebroadcasting something that's being broadcast somewhere else? Are they better at detecting that?
It doesn't matter. They're just as good. It's the same machine. It's roughly the same machine. But yeah, there's, like, for instance, there's companies that very much frown upon rebroadcasting their keynotes, and they're pretty aggressive about turning those. You'll get, if you rebroadcast their keynotes, they will cut off your stream and they will give you a strike. So rebroadcasting live, a lot of times when people are doing it live, they want you to watch their flow of that. And that's where you're most likely actually. So it's not that it's better or worse, but it's much more aggressive. So if it's going to block a live stream, it's going to, you're more likely to get a strike out of it and you're more likely to be cut. That's the one place you may be interrupted, is if you're rebroadcasting a live stream. Next question.
Daniel Goldstein in Washington, D.C. Is there a faster way to upload videos to YouTube besides the obvious browser-based method?
Good, Rupert.
So faster, I'm not sure. There are several ways you can upload. They're documented in a support article. I'll put a link to that. But also, if you happen to have your content in another cloud service, OneDrive, some of those, Dropbox, whatever, some of those will have an inbuilt send to YouTube feature.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
I don't know if you wanted, a couple weeks ago, YouTube's upload limiter actually broke, and I had uploaded a couple videos, and it took my whole pipe down. And I was doing other stuff, and it just kind of completely froze it. So you probably want a little bit of a limit to that upload.
Yeah, how long it takes to upload things depends on what city you're in and how busy that ingest point is. Because it's finding whatever the local load is to move that around. The other thing is that if you have a lot of videos that you're trying to put up, note that there's shortcuts for it, I believe, on the Mac platform, and then things like compressor and Adobe's media encoder often have things that are built into it. So you can throw a whole bunch of files onto it. They'll compress them and put them up. So you just have to put all your login information up. But I know that with compressor and with even with Final Cut and with Resolve, you can just set the outputs, for them, and they'll just put them directly up. Now, I don't do that because I like to see the video before I publish it. So I tend to be much more manual. I'm not usually trying to put up mass amounts of things. I try to put up each thing that is actually going to work. Next question.
Mark Horner in Seattle, Washington's next. Was surprised and delighted to see my Zoom webinar and stream to YouTube in HD last night. Somehow this was due to Guy Cochran's magic. How did he do it?
Guy, how do you do it? Oh, I can't hear you. He's increasing the suspense here.
It was a simple Zoom room, but it wasn't so simple with his because I couldn't join from a Zoom room because he locked it down pretty tight. And so every time that I tried to enter in the username and passcode, it said denied. And so what I did was I paired my phone as me. You can do with the sharing code, you can do a join. So basically a Zoom room will bump a webinar streams output to YouTube to 720p. So his past 9 episodes have been 360p to YouTube, and it looks, kind of muddy and just not very high res. So when I was able to join with the Zoom room, it upped his resolution, not to the attendees in the webinar itself. It still didn't look so good because we're in this webinar used to 1080p, and so it looks gorgeous. So I watched his show mostly on YouTube because it looks so much better. And yeah, that's the trick, is just a Zoom room, but then pair it with your phone to get into the higher. You have to register for the webinar.
Yeah, and one thing that's going to be is interesting is we're probably going to just let everyone know that eventually, once we get this all working, we'll probably move everybody to watching it on YouTube or onto our own private server, primarily because the show won't look the same. We'll all be sitting here talking, and then there's a whole bunch of graphics and a whole bunch of other support and everything else that's going on outside of this. So it won't make as much sense to watch it here, because this will be the boring version of us. There'll just be a basic version of this rather than with all the pre-production. Next question. Can't hear you.
Oops, I'm sorry. Moving on to David Brady in New York. Streaming with pre-configured settings to Facebook and YouTube from either my HOW Mevo and or the Atem Extreme, I will often get exceeding bandwidth warnings. Is there a way to modify the XML to fine-tune the stream?
I don't know. Exceeding bandwidth is probably a Facebook thing, not a YouTube thing, unless you're really pushing, again, 30 megs a second. Exceeding bandwidth, Facebook, again, is more sensitive to what it's getting in. So it may be Facebook that doesn't like that. You should always be able to change those, but I haven't used those. I haven't streamed those specifically. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I use the Mevo Start from time to time. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about, and I've never run into that error message. So I don't know. I'm not exactly sure where you would have something to.
I have seen that error message, and again.
Oh yeah.
But I haven't, and I will admit that I have these Atem switchers, and because I have so many other encoders, I've literally never encoded from them, so I have no idea how the encoding works. I should pop one up and test it, but I haven't seen it. Go ahead, Oliver.
Is it probably an error in the error message? So it might mean that the data you want to send out is exceeding what's there for the bandwidth that you have available. So. That might be, so you have your encoder set to 5 megabits and you can only send 2.5. You could interpret this message as meaning that exact problem.
Right.
But I don't know.
Yep. Next question.
Rupert McCrae here on the panel in Dallas, Texas is up next. Is paying for YouTube Premium with no ads worth the price? And do premium views provide a different level of monetization to content creators because there are no ads?
Go ahead, Ken.
Yes to both. I took the trial on the premium. When that ended, it was so awful. Seeing YouTube with adverts, I pay for it. So it's a different experience.
It's a completely different experience of YouTube. Go ahead, Courtney.
I found an app called SmartTube that somehow, I don't know how they do it. It just doesn't show the ads on YouTube, and I've gotten so used to it I can't watch YouTube anymore else.
YouTube's almost on. Once you get used to premium, YouTube is almost unwatchable with the ads. You're used to it right now. You're used to the gruel that you've been eating, but as soon as you have some better food, you're like, oh, I can't go back. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and as a content creator, I can actually put those ad breaks in. I believe it's every 7 minutes. You can't do anything shorter than that. If you have like an hour-long video, you could have every 7 minutes. You could have ad breaks in there, and I think they're doing 2 ads now for YouTube.
Yep. Go ahead, Rupert.
I'm just really curious about the second part of the question, whether that actually results in a different level of monetization for the channel.
I believe that the creator, and Jeffrey might know more, but I believe that the creator, when someone's watching from premium, the creator is getting some small percentage of money back. So the premium, there's some percentage of the premium content or premium payments that are, I don't know how it's cut up, but it is distributed back to the creators based on the viewership, which doesn't make much sense. If you're getting tens of thousands of views, it's probably pennies. But if you're getting millions of views, it starts to add up pretty quickly. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, maybe Jeffrey can answer this. I was always curious, when those ads drop in, are they done randomly, or sometimes it seems like it's at a very intentional point in the story or something where it's going to be a cliffhanger and that's when the ad comes up, or is it just AI just throwing them in there? I'm curious to know.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Well, the answer is it really depends. If the creator decides to put those ads in there and they say at 10:51, that's where I'm going to stop, that's where the ad goes in. I've done that before, where I have in between breaks and I'll put an ad in there. If they put no ads in, you can also check and uncheck ad flavors. So I can say, I don't want mid-roll ads in there, so I'll just uncheck that when I put the video up, so you don't get any ads. But then if you leave everything as it is, then YouTube's going to do what they want to do, and that is put as many ads as they can in there.
Next question
comes from Stan Chan, an often participant here on Office Hours from Roseville, California. When will YouTube support 8K streaming?
Go ahead, Karl.
You can do it right now. You probably just need the camera though. So here's the camera. So it is possible. The YouTubes have to flick the switch. They have to increase, as you said, the bit rate, Alex. It's 36. I'll need to increase that, obviously. But this is one of the cameras that can do it directly from the camera. It IP streams, RTSP, and SRT stream.
And YouTube will play back 8K?
Yeah, my TV plays back YouTube at 8K now, so I'm watching stuff in 8K now, 8K 30 and 8K 60.
Wow. I was going to say 2022 because I think it's going to come next year, but I am way off that it's available already. I don't know how I missed that memo, but yeah, it's interesting. Okay, yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
I think YouTube, you have to be on an Android to view 8K.
You've got to be on a special TV. Yeah, you got to be on a special Android enabled TV at the moment. But I am, so I'm able to watch the 8K stuff on my TV. The chipset in my TV is exactly the same as the 8K TV. So.
I think the most important thing is, how does it look?
I'm looking at Canon stuff from a camera they've yet announced that's at 8K 60 frames a second from a drone over Tokyo. It looks amazing.
So I'm going to post some stuff for you to look at there because I've got some 8K footage and it would be interesting. I'll put it on my page and then you can download it and let me know how it looks. It'd be interesting. I have no way to look at it yet. so at 8K. Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, Minnesota is in with, I love YouTube Premium, no commercials, ability to listen with the screen off. Other premium users here, and what would you want added to YouTube Premium, if anything? And do you think Facebook Video would ever implement something similar?
Ken?
Yeah, the only thing I would like to add, if they could, would be to skip past the YouTubers' own inbuilt ads. Those are the bits that I'd want. I mean, whenever they're selling some, VPN, I have to manually skip past it. So
yeah, go ahead, Karl.
For archival footage, I'd like the ability to select the aspect ratio myself. So someone's uploaded, 4:3 and 6:9. They've done it incorrectly, and the only way to do it is download it and fix it yourself. Where I'd like the ability to say, can I change the format of this particular video to this particular format? Aspect ratio.
Next question. Can't hear you.
Aaron Husledge, Durham, North Carolina. What's the future of YouTube streaming?
Well, I think that we're obviously 8K. No, 8K, I don't know if we're 8K streaming yet. I think it's just 8K video.
8K playback from YouTube, but no up.
Yeah.
There's no up to streaming. Yeah.
So I think that 8K streaming, I think that I've already started experiment. I'm going to be doing a lot more in the next couple of weeks with HDR streaming. So you can stream in HDR10, not Vision yet, but you can do HDR10 or HLG. So those are all possible. And then the next thing I think is going to be, we have binaural, but what we already saw with YouTube TV is the ability to stream Dolby 5.1 or 5.1. And so I am going to guess that will eventually get to YouTube. So I think that's, or maybe even just YouTube Premium, it's hard to know, where it ends up. But I think that immersive sound is something that's should be coming up or that I would expect to see sometime in the near future. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
I'd love to see match streaming. So you could have on your TV in the living room, you could have a TV in the bedroom, and you walk back and forth and everything would just be perfectly aligned. Right now, there can be anything from a second to a minute delay.
I think that picture-in-picture with separate streams, so watching two streams at the same time, and the reason that you would do that is for commentary. So you can say, I want to stream, I want to have two streams hitting me at the same time, and I want to watch them separately, which you can kind of do now, but having it more, you can do it with two windows, but could you do it, built in so you have commentary tracks? Go ahead, Karl.
So SpaceX do this for most of their launches. They actually have like a technical control room stream, which is just essentially a graphic, and the actual non-commentator version of the stream, which is actually just the mission control. And then they have a commentator speaking about what the mission is. Mm-hmm. The way to get them synced is turn off your internet, have everything running, and then turn the internet back on, have both streams going, and they'll both load at the exact same time, and they'll both be in sync as to what SpaceX.
They'll both grab the same segments at the same time.
Yep, exactly. And so actually it's not a power thing. It's just turn off your internet and then turn it back on.
Right.
And then but you have to do it pretty quickly or YouTube will just fail out. So do it quickly. It will sync up to whatever SpaceX, well, in this case, SpaceX was synced. So if SpaceX were out of sync, well, then you're going to have to do it yourself.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So already on YouTube, we're seeing the sort of hashtag shorts, short videos, like trying to compete in the TikTok space. Maybe they may try and promote that more. I also wonder whether they'll try and get some more of the e-gaming streams over from Twitch, something like that.
Oliver?
If you want to do multi-stream viewing and in the browser window, there's something called multistream.co, which allows you to pull multiple YouTube streams at the same time in one window.
That's interesting. What's it called again?
I posted the link in Mukana.
Okay, great.
Multistream.co.
That's great. Very cool. All right, next question.
Comes from JJ McKenna, often in the panel in San Rafael. What is the workflow for making sure that a YouTube stream starts exactly on time?
JJ, I think throwing a softball because of the we do that. He's seen the inside of us doing it a lot. So the way we do this is that we play out a countdown clock into YouTube ahead of time, and usually not very far because it can change. But we play a countdown clock in, and then we look at the offset. So, and what you want to do is refresh your page right before you measure it. Once it's running, and then we're looking at what's leaving our switcher, and we look at that countdown clock that's coming out of YouTube, and you'll hear us call out nominal offset is 12 seconds, 19 seconds, 26 seconds, whatever that is. Then we start when we do our count, one of the things we use the countdown clock for is that we start our countdown 12 seconds. So it's hitting 12 seconds ahead. So we're basically using the countdown clock to resync all of our crew and the guests and the host and everything else, so that everyone just is is in the future watching that countdown clock. And then when it comes out, generally it's hitting right at the top of the hour. And usually we consider it within range to be plus or minus 2 seconds. Go ahead, Oliver.
Yeah, I think that every viewer gets a sort of a different sort of delay. And so if you set it to low latency, you might be very good, but I don't think you get it.
We find it's the size of the segment. So if they're watching it and set to live, like if it's red and it's live, it'll be plus or minus 2 seconds. Because it's just which segment what segment they last grabbed to do that. That's why we don't. When we hit it right on, there's a lot of excitement though within our little geeky crew. Next question.
Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada says, we are surprised that YouTube demonetized a version of an a cappella singer singing a song. So it's more than detecting copyright recording. It's detecting musical passages, perhaps?
Yeah, go ahead, Karl.
So there's two aspects of this. There's the recording rights and the publishing rights. If you sing a cover and you're not paying the coverage fee, which is like 10% in most countries, then the publishing rights will get you. And they're using similar technology to Shazam to do that.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, there's an app you can Google Assist where you can hum or even whistle a popular song and it will find it. So probably using that AI tech to do that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
And if you're doing Eagles or Prince, you're almost going to be taken down instantly. So there's a lot of artists that have that option.
A handful of the old artists. Like none of the modern artists are really doing that anymore. Like that's kind of a vestige of the past. The older artists, still a couple of them take it personally. Next question.
Chris Fenwick in Sacramento, our friend, says, recently had an issue getting audio out of a virtual camera into Mimo Live. Does anyone on the panel have a clue what I was doing wrong?
Rupert?
Sometimes these virtual cameras don't even support audio, so you need to bring your audio in through a separate pipeline.
I don't know if Oliver has any thoughts in that area.
I'm trying to understand the question, but Chris, you can always email me and
Yep.
we'll figure it out.
All right. Next question.
Roscoe Jones is next. Looks like YouTube wants you to use their interface for premium cable channels, a la Home and Garden TV, just like Apple TV Plus is doing. Does this allow them to add or overlay ads, or is it just an audience grab for cross-marketing and tracking?
I don't know if I've seen it, and I admit that I use it in such a basic form that I maybe I'm just not familiar with it. My guess is they want the data, and they probably also want to unify the experience for the user. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so I actually had some experience with this recently. I have a lake place about 45 minutes north, and I always use Safari, sometimes Firefox to watch it, and suddenly it would not let me do it. It kept on saying that I wasn't in the area, like somehow it knew that I was out of the Spokane area, and they tried to shut me down, and I called tech support and they said, use Chrome. Big surprise.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So the way I think I'm reading this right, the way that I see that, I tried YouTube Premium with the cable channels involved. And of course, for the cable channel, you have the cable commercials, and then you have whatever the locals will put in. A lot of cable companies will put in their cable commercials to get more services and things like that. So there's probably some place for YouTube to put their commercials.
Next question.
Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, BC. Again, as far as I know, we want -24 LUFS for Zoom like here, but -16 for YouTube. Should I split audio into two and run these in two streams rather than daisy chain them using Zoom Stream to YouTube feature?
Yeah, we run a little lower, and the reason we do that is so that all the mics can be synced up. Some mics just don't get to -16. So we back up to make sure that everyone can have we've decided that consistent audio is better than loud audio. So typically, as we move forward, we'll be moving most of these things to a mixer that lets us, work with everybody's input and push that forward, or grab the entire program and move it up or down. So that'll be a slightly different approach. But yeah, there's not any way to do it if you're using Zoom. You have to manage everybody's mics. There's no way to control it right now, currently. Next question.
JJ McKenna back from San Rafael with, does anyone know if YouTube has multi-camera ingest as part of their development roadmap to maybe cut out all the unnecessary middleware?
Go ahead, Karl.
As far as I'm aware, it's not part of their protocol they support, but there are ways of doing it. You can stream in 4K and just have a box like the Blackmagic one that you can put in 4 different streams, A, B, C, D, and put into 4 different quadrants. And then as you're watching, you can use, there are YouTube players, which you can say, hey, only look at this quadrant. So you can actually use these third-party YouTube players, and you can actually switch between the quadrants. All it's doing is just looking at a corner of the video, but that's a third-party way of doing it.
Yeah, the problem really with cutting there is latency. YouTube's getting it as an RTMP stream, so you're already at least a couple seconds behind when you're cutting it. So doing that is, and a lot of people have talked about it, and of course you can do it if you stream everything via SRT or something else to Vmix in the cloud. Those are ways to do it, but I don't think YouTube's going to do it because of the way the protocol requires the latency that's already inherent there. Next question.
Tobias Moss in Minneapolis, Minnesota. How does Spotify video, and how is it relevant to the conversation? When Office Hours publishes as a podcast, will it be a Spotify video podcast?
Go ahead, Rupert. I can't hear you, Rupert. Yeah, go ahead, Karl.
So podcasts are RSS feeds. So as long as your server supports video, when someone presses play, or just play back the video file, it's more of a hosting issue. So you can embed in your RSS feed a playback from a YouTube video if that's what you want to do.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So I know that Spotify are looking to get into the live concerts business. I'm assuming that's going to include video.
Yeah, we probably won't do anything on Spotify unless I get paid for it. And primarily is because I take umbrage. I'm an iPhone user, and I take umbrage with pretty much every company that I still use Epic's tools because they have the best tools. But Spotify is one of the companies that's threatening. I look at it as an existential threat to my existence. I have a Mac ecosystem. I'm not interested in it being fragmented at all, and I think that they're part of the problem. So I won't put anything on Spotify as a result, and I've killed my membership. I have to pull a couple things down before I take it off my phone, but I won't use Spotify because of that. Next question. Can't hear you, Bill.
Aaron Hutzledge, Durham, North Carolina. Is anyone interested in building an open source 4K HDR HLS live streaming chain and tutorials for YouTube?
There's a person that's already done a little bit of this that you may want to check out, and that's going to be Streamline from Colleen Henry. I think we started doing, she's already got an open source stuff you want to take a look at before you go any further down the path. Getting her involved might be useful, but the box that I have here, we built together just to do that about 4 years ago. So, but check out Streamline on GitHub and check out some of the videos that she's already done. But I think that I would start there, and then, yeah, we're definitely interested in doing more, and she'd probably be a good person to get included in some kind of open source thing because she knows a couple things about HLS. Next question.
Roscoe Jones. I think Jeffrey just talked about this. Is there a way to stop YouTube from putting an opening ad on my 2 million views video?
I don't think so. I don't think that you can. I mean, I think that's part of the relationship between YouTube is that you're getting 2 million downloads would have been really expensive to pay for if you had to. I mean, you're like, what, I think people get upset about it, about the ads getting put on there. I get upset about the ads being inserted into stuff. Now I have non-monetization on mine, but I still think they have the right to do it. So I turn I have mine turned off, but but ours aren't that interesting either. But they have the right to put ads on it because they're providing free bandwidth. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I think if you actually did monetize and you have lots of monetized videos and then you just have like a one-off or something like that that's doing 2 million views, that would change the game. But I'm not 100% sure on that, if YouTube would actually put an ad on or not. They definitely wouldn't put it in the middle if you didn't want that. But maybe Tips and Tails will get ads.
Yeah. And again, that's part of our relationship with YouTube, is that they've given us a place to easily upload and provide free content to the world. But the cost is that they had to do it for some reason, and that was to sell ads. Next question.
Hershey Trevidi in Central Florida says, thanks for the great content. Audio description for the blind and visually impaired is becoming more popular. How hard would it be for YouTube and their movie rentals and such to pipe in the secondary audio, even for creators wanting to use ad?
Go ahead, Karl.
So that's something they could easily put in. I'm not sure if they even do. I don't rent stuff from YouTube, but they can easily put in different languages, audio description, commentaries. They can put in as many audio channels as their format supports.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I used to do a lot of work. That was my charity effort. In fact, that's how I learned to be a broadcaster. I was working for Recording for the Blind and for a group in Phoenix called Sun Sounds that read the daily paper. That was my kind of getting into the industry. This is all changing. There used to be sideband special radios. All that's kind of gone away. Everything's migrating to the web. Those reader services that used to exist are now using AI to literally just read out the content from print work if they can get it in a print stream.
Right.
So it's just in flux right now, and I don't think it's entirely settled down. Should be easier, not harder, as we go forward.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a kind of an amazing thing that YouTube has not really supported, is multiple languages, in just a general stream, of just being able to dub those languages in. A lot of it is that there just wasn't enough demand, because it turns out that doing the dubbing, takes people and costs money, and there's a lot of other things, and so they just don't see it as a high enough. There's not enough demand for it for them to put engineering resources. We have to remember, we can say they should just add it, but there has to be a groundswell of now. Apple doesn't do that. They have a lot of those get incorporated into it, because from the very top, Apple's commitment to accessibility is extremely high. Literally, you can send an email to them and they'll pay attention to it. That's something that Apple pays an incredible amount of attention to, and it's not connected to money. They just want to make sure that they have all of those things available. I think YouTube takes a more practical look. They just have there's a lot of fires, and they got to figure out which ones to put out. And multi-language and audio description hasn't been a big enough fire for them to put out compared to all the other things that they're trying to do with a limited number of people. Go ahead, Courtney.
I think for audio description, it's a difficult task for something like an AI to handle, because the description will be Mark looks furtively out the window. That's kind of hard to decipher with an AI robot, whereas audio, just outputting the script is easy.
We're going to keep moving. We're running out of time. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, would there be any way to gateway YouTube chat to a standards-based chat platform like IRC, Internet Relay Chat? I know there is a gateway on GitHub, but I don't know of any other solution.
Go ahead, Rupert.
So there probably are a few number of solutions out there. They're going to be passion projects for the people who do them, because it's just too small of a niche. It's not commercially viable for anybody to build that solution.
We actually have that solution. The sister app to Mukana is called Commenda, and it will scrape from any number of YouTube ads. It's available in the API. The tokenization of it is a little bit messy. So there's a lot of, if you have a high volume event, it can be difficult to keep it running. So there's a little bit of an issue there, but you can absolutely scrape all the questions from YouTube, Facebook, obviously Twitter hashtags, Twitch. They all have a back end to grab onto it, and our tool will grab all of them. So if you stream to 4 or 5 different platforms, it'll grab all of them, compile them into something that you can manage centrally, and then decide what you want to do with them. So YouTube's definitely doable. Go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Rupert, real quick.
Restream and StreamYard also have
the same thing. Yeah, they're using the same API. Go ahead, Rupert.
The question was specifically for IRC, the protocol IRC protocol.
Yeah, you could build something that would do it, but nothing exists out there. Next question.
Michael Fisk in Spokane Valley says, I have no issues with advertising on free version platforms. What would the panelists think about having a lower pay scale mini premium plan, whereas a subscriber could control their personal menu rather than YouTube juggling us occasionally?
I think it just gets too complex. Everybody wants something, it's one of those things that if you start making the menu more complex, it makes it much harder to manage, and there's more likelihood for instability and people just being upset. People don't understand. We have to remember that at scale, things can get really hard to customize and have them be successful. Next question.
Michael Fisk in Spokane Valley again. I've noted that pop-ups during broadcasts have increased and understand annoying. It gets more annoying, I guess, as it goes on.
Yeah, it's go ahead, Rupert.
Well, people want more and more, and they want to pay less and less. And then you've got a growing segment of people who are going to pay subscription to get out of the ads, and that means you've got to squeeze more money out of the people who are still watching the ads.
Yeah, go ahead, Karl.
So there are two ways to avoid pop-ups in YouTube if you're watching long form content. So one would be Apple TV or iOS device. They don't support pop-ups. And if you want to get rid of all ads out of YouTube, but you're limited to, I think, 720, the original iPad with the Apple written YouTube app doesn't support ads, full stop. So if you've got one, or get one on eBay, they're quite expensive now. But the original YouTube app written by Apple that supports H.264, I think 720. Yeah, but it doesn't support ads in any way, in any form. Zero ads, but you get all of YouTube.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I don't think it works anymore. YouTube have stopped it on that.
Right.
So
yeah, that would be against what the whole point of the thing. I do think that we're going to find that content is going to continue to be more and more wrapped around subscription because people, when given the option, don't want to give up their privacy. And so I think that they're when given the choice, they're choosing to opt out, and and many are the most valuable, the people with the most flexible money that can pay to get out of it or getting out of it, but they're also the people that would consume the most. And so you're pulling out all the people that support the platform the most effectively from an advertising base. And so that makes the whole thing, this whole process that we're seeing over the next decade is probably going to be away from advertising and towards someone paying for it. And there's a variety of ways of cutting up. Doesn't necessarily mean the user will pay for it, but it means that but there won't be generalized ads that pay for it. Next question.
Mike Dean from Arlington says, hello from Virginia, just tuning in. Hope everyone's having a awesome day, and wondered what our thoughts were on the release of NDI 5 today.
We're all excited to find out more about it. We're going to have some folks that can talk to NDI in a couple of weeks coming in to talk to us. So so stay tuned for that. I don't think a lot of us have had enough experience yet. Next question.
Michael Fisk in Spokane Valley has our last question of the day. Eyes and more attention. Oh, this is the second part of that.
Yeah. So just as a note, if you ask things in two pieces and people don't vote them up together, then we get them in pieces and they don't make any more sense. so that's something to always keep in mind. And I know that we keep the number of letters that you have to use somewhat limited. We do that on purpose because we found that when we gave people more words, they would use them all, and then it was harder for us to read. So we limit the number of characters to something that's readable for the show. So we also took away, we had notes that you could add, and then people use the notes to continue their question instead of correct their question. So then we took those away. So there's there's kind of a bit of a cat and mouse here that we have to make it work for the show. And so if you break it up into sections, it makes it harder for us. Go ahead, Roscoe.
And if you happen to make a mistake by hitting return while you're asking a question, just delete it and ask it again.
Yeah, that's the best way to do that. All right. That was a lot of questions. Great job to our producers. That was great. Like lots and lots of good questions that really dug through the stuff that we have now. We can come back to this. Popular ones like this, I just go, well, we might even come back to one that's more general. You can talk about lots of different ones. We just thought YouTube would be, I thought that we'd end up spending more time talking about it and less time answering questions, but there were so many questions. All there was to do was answer them. But really great job at asking a lot of great questions to our producers in the audience. Great job to our panel. That was a lot of questions to field. We stayed focused and effective, and we were able to cut through a lot. I don't know how many the total is. I have to figure out. I think I became more interested in this when someone asked, how many questions have we answered total? And we started doing rough math and figured it was somewhere between 20 and 30,000 questions that have been served up. And so now I feel like I pay attention now per show just out of curiosity. But today was a high volume show. But we didn't leave any behind. No question left behind. That won't always be the case, but we should enjoy it while it lasts. And a reminder that tomorrow we have education with Emily Russo and the teaching crew. I'll be there as well, just following along and being a member. And then again, then we'll have the Sunday weekend, just hang out. So we do that as well. And thank you all. We'll either see you tomorrow. We'll see you in 30 seconds in the post show. Thanks.